Question 1. During the evaluation of a new assembly line process, an ergonomist utilizes a widely recognized checklist for assessing manual handling risks. While the checklist identifies several potential issues, the ergonomist observes specific task variations and worker postures not explicitly detailed in the tool. What is the most appropriate course of action for the ergonomist to ensure a thorough and effective ergonomic assessment? Option A. Supplement the checklist findings with direct observation, task analysis, and professional judgment to identify and address all relevant ergonomic risks, even those not explicitly listed. Option B. Modify the checklist by adding new items based on the observed task variations before completing the assessment. Option C. Strictly adhere to the checklist, documenting only the identified issues, and recommend general improvements based on the checklist categories. Option D. Conclude that the checklist is insufficient and abandon its use in favor of a completely unstructured observational approach. The correct answer is A. Supplement the checklist findings with direct observation, task analysis, and professional judgment to identify and address all relevant ergonomic risks, even those not explicitly listed. Explanation. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in industrial ergonomics, balancing the efficiency of standardized tools with the need for nuanced, context-specific assessments. The professional challenge lies in recognizing that, while checklists and assessment tools are invaluable for ensuring consistency and covering essential elements, they are not a substitute for professional judgment and adaptability. Over-reliance on a checklist can lead to overlooking unique hazards or failing to adequately address the specific needs of an individual worker or task. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it acknowledges the limitations of standardized tools and prioritizes a comprehensive, integrated assessment. This involves using the checklist as a guide, but critically evaluating the findings in the context of the specific work environment, task demands, and individual worker characteristics. This approach aligns with the ethical obligation of a certified industrial ergonomist to provide thorough and effective solutions, ensuring worker well-being and compliance with relevant occupational health and safety regulations, which generally mandate a proactive and comprehensive approach to hazard identification and control. An incorrect approach that solely relies on the checklist without critical evaluation fails to meet the professional standard. This can lead to a superficial assessment, potentially missing significant ergonomic risks that fall outside the checklist's predefined parameters. Failure to conduct a thorough and individualized assessment could be considered a breach of professional duty and potentially a violation of regulatory requirements that mandate a diligent effort to identify and mitigate workplace hazards. Another incorrect approach, which involves modifying the checklist without proper validation or justification, introduces subjectivity and can compromise the reliability and comparability of assessments. While adaptation might seem beneficial, it can lead to inconsistent application and may not align with the intended scope or evidence base of the original tool. This can undermine the credibility of the ergonomic assessment and potentially lead to overlooking established best practices or regulatory expectations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the purpose and limitations of the chosen assessment tools. 2. Critically applying the tool, recognizing when its parameters may not fully capture the situation. 3. Integrating observations and data with professional knowledge and experience. 4. Documenting the rationale for any deviations from or adaptations of standard procedures. 5. Prioritizing worker safety and well-being above strict adherence to a tool's limitations. Question 2. Benchmark analysis indicates a significant prevalence of poor posture among assembly line workers, leading to reported discomfort and potential long-term health issues. As a certified industrial ergonomist, CIE, which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices and regulatory expectations for addressing this situation? Option A. Document the observed poor postures and inform management that the issue is primarily a matter of individual worker habits and physical fitness, suggesting that the company is not directly responsible for addressing it. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive ergonomic assessment of the workstations and tasks, identify specific postural stressors, and recommend targeted engineering and administrative controls to promote neutral postures and reduce physical strain, while also advising workers on self-management techniques within the scope of ergonomic guidance. Option C. Implement a series of stretching and exercise programs for the workers during their breaks to improve their physical conditioning and ability to maintain better posture, without altering the work environment itself. Option D. Advise workers to seek immediate medical attention from their physicians for diagnosis and treatment of their postural issues, and await further instructions from healthcare providers before implementing any workplace changes. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive ergonomic assessment of the workstations and tasks, identify specific postural stressors, and recommend targeted engineering and administrative controls to promote neutral postures and reduce physical strain, while also advising workers on self-management techniques within the scope of ergonomic guidance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the certified industrial ergonomist, CIE, to move beyond simply identifying poor posture to evaluating the effectiveness of interventions within a specific regulatory context. The challenge lies in discerning which approach aligns with best practices for health promotion and risk mitigation as defined by relevant occupational health and safety guidelines, without overstepping the scope of ergonomic assessment into medical diagnosis or treatment. The CIE must consider the practical implementation and long-term impact of recommendations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it focuses on a systematic, evidence-based evaluation of existing interventions and their impact on worker health, directly addressing the identified postural issues. This aligns with the CIE's role in identifying hazards, recommending controls, and evaluating their effectiveness. By consulting established ergonomic principles and relevant occupational health guidelines, CIE ensures that recommendations are grounded in scientific understanding and regulatory expectations for workplace safety and health. This approach prioritizes proactive risk management and worker well-being within the established professional and regulatory framework. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach fails by focusing solely on immediate symptom relief without addressing the underlying ergonomic causes of poor posture. This is professionally unacceptable, as it neglects the fundamental responsibility of an ergonomist to identify and control workplace hazards that contribute to musculoskeletal disorders. It also risks creating a dependency on temporary fixes rather than sustainable solutions, potentially violating ethical obligations to promote long-term worker health and safety. Another incorrect approach is professionally unacceptable, because it involves recommending specific medical treatments or diagnostic procedures. This oversteps the scope of practice for a CIE, which is to assess the work environment and recommend ergonomic controls, not to provide medical advice or diagnosis. Such an approach could lead to misdiagnosis, delayed appropriate medical care, and potential liability for the ergonomist and the employer, violating professional boundaries and potentially contravening regulations that define the scope of practice for allied health professionals. A further incorrect approach is professionally unacceptable because it dismisses the observed postural issues as solely individual responsibility without considering the workplace factors. This ignores the core principle of ergonomics, which is to design work to fit the worker and to identify and mitigate workplace-related risks. Failing to consider the work environment as a contributing factor to poor posture is a dereliction of professional duty and a failure to adhere to the principles of occupational health and safety, which emphasize employer responsibility for providing a safe working environment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first conducting a thorough ergonomic assessment to identify specific postural risks and their contributing workplace factors. This should be followed by a review of existing controls and their effectiveness, referencing established ergonomic guidelines and relevant occupational health and safety regulations. Recommendations should focus on modifying the work environment, tasks, or tools to reduce physical stress and promote healthier postures. Collaboration with healthcare professionals is appropriate for diagnosis and treatment, but the ergonomist's primary role is in hazard identification and control within the work system. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal that several employees in a specific production line are reporting persistent tingling and numbness in their hands and fingers, particularly after prolonged periods of repetitive assembly tasks. These symptoms are localized to specific dermatomes, suggesting potential nerve involvement. Considering the certified industrial ergonomist, CIE, scope of practice, and relevant regulatory frameworks. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation to ensure worker health and safety? Option A. Advise employees to take frequent breaks and stretch their hands and wrists, assuming the symptoms are due to general fatigue and will resolve with rest. Option B. Suggest that employees consult a medical professional for diagnosis and treatment without undertaking any specific ergonomic investigation of the work environment. Option C. Implement a company-wide policy requiring all employees to wear wrist braces, regardless of their specific symptoms or job tasks, as a preventative measure. Option D. Conduct a detailed ergonomic assessment of the workstation and task sequence, focusing on identifying potential sources of nerve compression or irritation, and recommend specific modifications to reduce exposure to these hazards. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed ergonomic assessment of the workstation and task sequence, focusing on identifying potential sources of nerve compression or irritation, and recommend specific modifications to reduce exposure to these hazards. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an ergonomist to interpret subtle, yet significant, physiological indicators of potential nerve compromise within a work environment. The challenge lies in distinguishing between transient discomfort and the early signs of a more serious, potentially irreversible, neurological issue. A failure to accurately assess and respond can lead to long-term health consequences for the worker and significant liability for the organization. The ergonomist must apply a deep understanding of neurophysiology and its interaction with workplace stressors, adhering strictly to the established professional standards and regulatory guidelines for industrial ergonomics. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, evidence-based evaluation that directly addresses the observed symptoms and their potential neurological underpinnings. This involves a comprehensive assessment of the workstation, task demands, and the worker's reported sensations, linking them to known mechanisms of nerve compression or irritation. By recommending specific ergonomic interventions aimed at reducing pressure or repetitive strain on the affected nerves, the ergonomist is acting proactively to prevent further injury and promote recovery. This aligns with the ethical imperative to protect worker health and safety, and implicitly with regulatory frameworks that mandate employers provide a safe working environment, which includes addressing ergonomic hazards that can lead to musculoskeletal and neurological disorders. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves dismissing the symptoms as minor or unrelated to the work environment without a thorough investigation. This fails to meet the professional standard of care, as it neglects potential ergonomic contributions to nerve-related symptoms. Ethically, it breaches the duty to investigate and address potential hazards. Regulatory frameworks implicitly require employers to act upon reported safety concerns, and ignoring such symptoms could be seen as a failure to provide a safe workplace. Another incorrect approach is to immediately recommend generic, non-specific interventions without understanding the underlying neurological mechanism. While some interventions might coincidentally help, this approach lacks the precision required for effective ergonomic problem-solving and may not address the root cause of the nerve issue. This demonstrates a lack of deep understanding of neuroergonomics and falls short of best practice, potentially leading to ineffective solutions and continued risk to the worker. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the worker's subjective reporting without objectively assessing the work environment and task demands. While subjective reporting is crucial, it must be corroborated and contextualized by objective ergonomic analysis. Failing to do so can lead to misdiagnosis and inappropriate interventions, neglecting the employer's responsibility to control workplace hazards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first acknowledging the worker's reported symptoms as a critical indicator of a potential problem. This should trigger a structured investigation that integrates knowledge of neurophysiology with ergonomic principles. The process involves 1. Detailed symptom gathering and localization. 2. Objective assessment of the work environment for potential nerve irritants, e.g., pressure points, repetitive postures, vibration. 3. Analysis of task demands and their biomechanical implications. And 4. Formulation of targeted interventions based on the identified causal links between the work environment and the neurological symptoms. Continuous monitoring and feedback are essential to ensure the effectiveness of interventions and worker well-being. Question 4. Regulatory review indicates that a manufacturing facility has experienced a 15% increase in musculoskeletal disorder, MSD, related workers' compensation claims over the past year, impacting productivity. The facility manager is seeking recommendations for addressing this trend, emphasizing immediate cost containment. As a certified industrial ergonomist, CIE, which approach best aligns with regulatory compliance and long-term operational goals. Option A. Implement a blanket purchase of generic ergonomic equipment, such as anti-fatigue mats and adjustable monitor stands, for all workstations to broadly address potential discomfort without specific task analysis. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive ergonomic risk assessment across all high-risk job tasks. Develop a prioritized list of interventions based on risk severity and potential productivity gains, and present a phased implementation plan with clear ROI projections. Option C. Focus solely on providing immediate first aid and pain management resources for affected employees, deferring any significant ergonomic modifications until the next fiscal year's budget cycle. Option D. Recommend a temporary reduction in production quotas to alleviate physical strain, without investigating the underlying ergonomic causes of the increased claims. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive ergonomic risk assessment across all high-risk job tasks. Develop a prioritized list of interventions based on risk severity and potential productivity gains, and present a phased implementation plan with clear ROI projections. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate cost-saving pressures with long-term, legally mandated safety and productivity goals. The certified industrial ergonomist, CIE, must navigate organizational priorities while adhering strictly to the regulatory framework governing workplace safety and health. Careful judgment is required to identify interventions that are both compliant and effective. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified ergonomic risk factors through a systematic, evidence-based process that aligns with the principles of proactive risk management and regulatory compliance. By prioritizing interventions based on risk assessment and potential impact on both safety and productivity, the CIE demonstrates adherence to the spirit and letter of regulations that mandate a safe working environment and encourage efficiency. This approach is ethically sound, as it prioritizes worker well-being and legal obligations over short-term financial expediency. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without a thorough ergonomic assessment fails to meet regulatory requirements for hazard identification and control. This can lead to continued or exacerbated risks, potential injuries, and subsequent legal liabilities, violating the employer's duty of care. Another incorrect approach that implements generic, unverified ergonomic solutions, even if seemingly cost-effective, is professionally deficient. It lacks the specificity and evidence base required for effective risk mitigation, and may not address the root causes of ergonomic issues, thus failing to achieve the desired improvements in safety and productivity, and potentially wasting resources. A third incorrect approach that defers all ergonomic improvements indefinitely due to budget constraints ignores the proactive obligations under regulatory frameworks, which often require employers to address known hazards in a timely manner, especially when they pose a significant risk to employee health and safety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape. This involves conducting thorough ergonomic risk assessments, prioritizing interventions based on the severity of risk and potential for improvement in both safety and productivity, and developing a phased implementation plan that considers resource availability, communication with management regarding the rationale for proposed interventions, including potential cost savings through reduced injuries and increased efficiency, is crucial. Continuous monitoring and evaluation of implemented solutions are also essential to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Question 5. The monitoring system demonstrates elevated readings for sustained awkward postures and high force exertion during specific assembly line tasks. Which of the following approaches best addresses these findings to mitigate musculoskeletal risk? Option A. Implement a mandatory, company-wide stretching program for all employees to counteract the observed physical demands. Option B. Rely solely on the monitoring system's alerts to implement automated adjustments to the assembly line speed and workstation layout without direct observation or worker input. Option C. Immediately reassign all workers performing these tasks to different roles, regardless of their individual capabilities or the nature of the new roles. Option D. Conduct a detailed task analysis of the identified assembly line tasks. Observe workers performing these tasks to confirm the postures and forces, and gather worker feedback on discomfort or pain. Then develop targeted ergonomic interventions based on this comprehensive assessment. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed task analysis of the identified assembly line tasks. Observe workers performing these tasks to confirm the postures and forces, and gather worker feedback on discomfort or pain. Then develop targeted ergonomic interventions based on this comprehensive assessment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge because it requires an ergonomist to interpret data from a monitoring system that indicates potential musculoskeletal stress without directly observing the tasks or the individuals performing them. The challenge lies in moving beyond simple data reporting to a nuanced understanding of the underlying biomechanical and physiological factors contributing to the observed readings, and then translating this into actionable ergonomic interventions. The ergonomist must consider the limitations of the monitoring system and the potential for misinterpretation, ensuring that interventions are evidence-based and aligned with best practices for musculoskeletal health. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive evaluation that integrates the monitoring system data with direct observation, task analysis, and worker feedback. This aligns with the principles of industrial ergonomics as outlined by professional bodies and regulatory guidance, which emphasize a holistic and multifaceted approach to risk assessment. By combining objective data with subjective and observational information, the ergonomist can validate the findings, identify specific risk factors, e.g., posture, force, repetition, vibration, and develop targeted, effective interventions. This approach is best professional practice because it ensures that interventions are grounded in a thorough understanding of the work environment and its impact on the musculoskeletal system, thereby maximizing the likelihood of reducing injury risk and improving worker well-being, in accordance with general principles of occupational health and safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely relying on the monitoring system data to implement generic system-wide changes. This fails to acknowledge that monitoring systems may have limitations, may not capture all relevant risk factors, e.g., psychosocial stressors, individual variability, and that specific tasks or individuals may require tailored solutions. Ethically, this approach could lead to ineffective intervention, wasted resources, and a failure to adequately protect workers, potentially violating principles of due diligence in occupational health and safety. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the monitoring system data entirely without further investigation, assuming it is inaccurate or irrelevant. This ignores potentially valuable objective information that could highlight emerging risks or confirm existing concerns. Professionally, this demonstrates a lack of critical evaluation and a failure to utilize all available tools for risk assessment, which could lead to missed opportunities for prevention and a breach of professional responsibility to proactively identify and mitigate hazards. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on individual worker behavior or training as the primary solution, without addressing the underlying work system design issues indicated by the monitoring data. While training is a component of ergonomic programs, it is often insufficient on its own when systemic ergonomic deficiencies are present. This approach can unfairly place the burden of risk management on the individual worker and may not effectively address the root causes of musculoskeletal stress, potentially leading to continued exposure and injury. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with this scenario should employ a systematic decision-making process. First, critically evaluate the capabilities and limitations of the monitoring system. Second, triangulate the monitoring data with direct observations of work tasks and environments. Third, engage with workers to gather their subjective experiences and feedback regarding discomfort or pain. Fourth, conduct a thorough task analysis to identify specific biomechanical stressors. Finally, synthesize all gathered information to develop evidence-based, targeted, and practical ergonomic interventions that address the identified root causes of musculoskeletal stress. This iterative process ensures that interventions are effective, efficient, and ethically sound. Question 6. The evaluation methodology shows that a task involves frequent lifting of objects weighing approximately 15 pounds, often performed with a bent back posture and reaching. Which approach best assesses the overall physical risk impact of this task for the purpose of recommending ergonomic interventions? Option A. Quantify the frequency of lifting, the average weight lifted, and the degree of spinal flexion during the lift, and integrate these metrics using a recognized ergonomic assessment tool to determine a risk score. Option B. Document the presence of lifting, bent back posture, and reaching as identified risk factors on a standard ergonomic checklist. Option C. Measure the duration of the bent back posture and the frequency of reaching, assuming the weight is a constant low-level hazard. Option D. Focus on the frequency of the lifting motion, as this is the primary indicator of repetitive motion risk. The correct answer is A. Quantify the frequency of lifting, the average weight lifted, and the degree of spinal flexion during the lift, then integrate these metrics using a recognized ergonomic assessment tool to determine a risk score. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in industrial ergonomics, assessing physical risk factors without relying solely on subjective observation or simple checklists. The professional challenge lies in moving beyond superficial identification of potential hazards to a robust impact assessment that considers the interplay of repetitive motion, force, and awkward postures in a real-world work environment. The CIE's role is to provide a scientifically sound and defensible evaluation that can inform effective risk mitigation strategies. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of a comprehensive ergonomic assessment, which requires a systematic and data-driven evaluation of the work task and its associated physical demands. This approach acknowledges that the mere presence of a physical risk factor does not automatically equate to an unacceptable risk level. The frequency, duration, magnitude, and individual susceptibility all contribute to the overall impact. Regulatory frameworks for occupational health and safety, such as those enforced by OSHA in the U.S., emphasize the employer's responsibility to identify and control recognized hazards. A thorough impact assessment is crucial for fulfilling this obligation by providing evidence-based justification for interventions. Ethically, it ensures that resources are directed towards the most significant risks and that interventions are effective in protecting worker health. An incorrect approach that relies solely on a checklist of potential risk factors fails to account for the context and severity of exposure. This is a regulatory failure because it does not demonstrate a proactive and thorough hazard identification and risk assessment process as required by safety regulations. It can lead to over-intervention on minor risks or under-intervention on significant ones, both of which are ethically problematic and potentially non-compliant. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on the frequency of a specific movement, without considering the force exerted or the posture adopted, is also a regulatory and ethical failure. This approach is incomplete and can misrepresent the actual risk. For example, frequent movement performed with low force and neutral posture may pose less risk than a less frequent movement involving high force and an awkward posture. This incomplete assessment can lead to ineffective control measures and a failure to protect workers from cumulative trauma disorders. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a tiered approach to risk assessment. First, a qualitative screening to identify potential risk factors. Repetitive motion, force, awkward postures should be conducted. This is often done through observation and worker interviews. Second, for tasks identified as potentially hazardous, a more quantitative or semi-quantitative impact assessment is necessary. This involves evaluating the magnitude, frequency, and duration of exposure to each risk factor, as well as the postures adopted. Tools and methodologies that integrate these factors, such as those that consider exposure limits or provide risk scoring, are essential. Finally, based on the impact assessment, appropriate control measures should be selected and implemented, followed by a re-evaluation to confirm their effectiveness. This systematic process ensures that risk assessments are comprehensive, defensible, and aligned with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations to worker safety. Question 7. Implementation of a new production line has led to increased reports of worker discomfort and fatigue. A certified industrial ergonomist, CIE, is tasked with conducting a risk assessment. Which approach best addresses the multifaceted nature of ergonomic risk in this scenario? Option A. Assess the organizational factors related to the new production line, such as work pace, shift schedules, job rotation, and team coordination. Option B. Systematically evaluate physical, cognitive, and organizational factors to identify potential interactions and develop integrated solutions for the reported discomfort and fatigue. Option C. Conduct a detailed analysis of workstation layout, tool design, and material handling to identify and mitigate physical stressors. Option D. Evaluate the impact of the new production line on worker cognitive load, including task complexity, information processing demands, and decision-making requirements. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed analysis of workstation layout, tool design, and material handling to identify and mitigate physical stressors. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the certified industrial ergonomist, CIE, to move beyond a singular focus on physical stressors and integrate a broader understanding of ergonomic domains to effectively address a complex workplace issue. The challenge lies in recognizing that a seemingly physical problem may have roots in cognitive or organizational factors, and a comprehensive risk assessment must account for all three types of ergonomics: physical, cognitive, and organizational. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the holistic principles of industrial ergonomics as defined by relevant professional bodies and implied by regulatory frameworks that aim to protect worker well-being comprehensively. By systematically evaluating physical, cognitive, and organizational factors, the ergonomist ensures that the root causes of the reported discomfort and potential injury are identified and addressed. This multifaceted approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes the worker's health and safety by considering all potential contributing elements, thereby preventing recurrence and promoting a sustainable work environment. It also aligns with the spirit of regulations that mandate proactive risk management and the creation of safe and healthy workplaces. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on physical aspects fails to acknowledge the interconnectedness of ergonomic domains. For instance, if the reported discomfort is due to high physical demands, but the underlying cause is poor task scheduling, organizational, or lack of clear instructions, cognitive, a purely physical intervention will be insufficient and potentially lead to continued or new issues. This represents a regulatory failure by not conducting a thorough risk assessment, as often required by general duty clauses or specific standards that mandate hazard identification and control across all relevant workplace factors. Ethically, it is a failure to provide competent and comprehensive service. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only cognitive factors, such as mental workload or decision-making stress, would similarly be a failure if the primary driver of the reported issues is indeed a physical one, like repetitive motion or awkward postures. This would be a regulatory and ethical failure for the same reasons as above, an incomplete assessment leading to ineffective solutions. A third incorrect approach that focuses exclusively on organizational factors, such as work pace or shift patterns, would miss the mark if the core problem stems from poorly designed workstations or tools, physical, or information overload, cognitive. This incomplete assessment is a professional and regulatory failing, as it does not fulfill the mandate of a comprehensive ergonomic risk assessment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a structured, iterative approach. First, clearly define the problem and gather initial information, including worker reports and observations. Second, conduct a preliminary assessment to identify potential ergonomic domains involved. Third, employ appropriate assessment tools and methodologies for each identified domain, e.g., posture analysis for physical, task analysis for cognitive, workflow analysis for organizational. Fourth, synthesize findings from all domains to identify root causes and contributing factors. Fifth, develop integrated recommendations that address all identified issues. Finally, implement, monitor, and reevaluate the effectiveness of interventions. This systematic process ensures that all relevant ergonomic factors are considered, leading to more effective and sustainable solutions. Question 8. Process analysis reveals a scenario where employees are frequently required to manually lift and transport heavy materials across a production floor. The current risk assessment relies solely on observational methods that categorize postures as acceptable or unacceptable without quantifying the forces involved. Which of the following represents the most appropriate next step for a certified industrial ergonomist to accurately assess the biomechanical risks associated with these lifting tasks, in accordance with established occupational health and safety principles? Option A. Utilize RIBA to assess the overall body posture during the lifting and carrying phases, focusing on static loading. Option B. Conduct a series of RULA assessments for each lifting motion to evaluate the postural demands on the upper extremities. Option C. Develop a custom checklist based on general ergonomic principles to identify potential hazards during the lifting process. Option D. Implement the NIOSH lifting equation to quantify the biomechanical forces and identify specific risk factors associated with the lifting tasks. Correct answer is D. Implement the NIOSH lifting equation to quantify the biomechanical forces and identify specific risk factors associated with the lifting tasks. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in industrial ergonomics, selecting the most appropriate risk assessment tool for a specific task. The professional challenge lies in understanding the nuances of each tool and their applicability to different types of work, ensuring that the chosen method accurately reflects the risks and leads to effective interventions. Over-reliance on a single tool or misapplication can lead to incomplete risk identification, ineffective control measures, and potential noncompliance with occupational health and safety regulations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive understanding of the task's nature, including the forces involved, posture, repetition, and duration. Selecting a tool that aligns with these characteristics is paramount. For tasks involving manual lifting, the NIOSH lifting equation is specifically designed to assess the biomechanical risks associated with lifting, lowering, carrying, and transporting loads. Its strength lies in its ability to quantify risk based on specific load characteristics and task parameters, providing a clear basis for intervention. This aligns with the principles of proactive risk management mandated by occupational health and safety legislation, which requires employers to identify and control hazards to prevent work-related injuries. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on RULA or RIBA for a manual lifting task. While RULA and RIBA are valuable tools for assessing risks associated with upper limb and whole body postures in tasks involving repetitive movements, awkward postures, and static loading, they are not specifically designed to quantify the biomechanical forces and cumulative trauma associated with manual lifting, in the same way the NIOSH lifting equation does. Using these tools in isolation for a lifting task would fail to adequately address the primary risk factors, potentially leading to an underestimation of the risk and a failure to implement appropriate lifting controls. This could be considered a failure to meet the regulatory duty of care to adequately assess and control workplace hazards. Another incorrect approach would be to use a tool that is not validated or recognized within the relevant regulatory framework, or to apply a tool without proper training or understanding of its limitations, which would also represent a failure in due diligence and professional practice. The professional decision-making process should involve a thorough task analysis, identifying the primary risk factors. If manual lifting is a significant component, the NIOSH lifting equation should be considered. If the task involves predominantly static postures, repetitive upper limb movements, or awkward postures not directly related to lifting, RULA or RIBA might be more appropriate. A comprehensive ergonomic assessment may even involve the use of multiple tools to capture a holistic view of the risks. The decision should always be guided by the goal of accurate risk identification and the implementation of effective, evidence-based control measures in compliance with all applicable occupational health and safety regulations. Question 9. Process analysis reveals that a specific assembly line task involves repetitive wrist flexion and extension, leading to reports of discomfort among workers. A proposed solution involves providing wrist splints to all workers performing this task. Considering the key principles of ergonomics, which of the following represents the most appropriate initial course of action? Option A. Implement a rotation schedule for workers performing the task to reduce the duration of exposure to the repetitive motion, without further investigation into workstation or task modifications. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive job task analysis to identify all contributing factors to discomfort. Evaluate the feasibility of engineering controls to modify the workstation or task, and consider administrative controls before implementing personal protective equipment like splints. Option C. Rely on worker feedback and anecdotal evidence to determine the most comfortable type of wrist splint and implement its use. Option D. Immediately procure and distribute wrist splints to all affected workers, as this directly addresses the reported physical motion causing discomfort. Correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive job task analysis to identify all contributing factors to discomfort. Evaluate the feasibility of engineering controls to modify the workstation or task, and consider administrative controls before implementing personal protective equipment like splints. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in industrial ergonomics where a proposed solution, while seemingly addressing a specific issue, may overlook broader ergonomic principles and potential unintended consequences. The professional challenge lies in balancing immediate problem-solving with a holistic, systems-based approach to ensure long-term worker well-being and productivity, adhering to the principles of the Certified Industrial Ergonomist (CIE) framework. The correct approach prioritizes a comprehensive understanding of the work system, encompassing human capabilities, task demands, and the work environment. This aligns with the core principles of ergonomics, which aim to optimize the interaction between humans and their work to prevent injury and enhance performance. Specifically, it reflects the CIE's emphasis on a systematic approach to hazard identification, risk assessment, and intervention design, ensuring that solutions are effective, sustainable, and do not introduce new risks. This approach is best professional practice because it is grounded in the scientific method of ergonomics, advocating for data-driven decision-making and a thorough evaluation of all relevant factors before implementing changes. It upholds the ethical responsibility of an ergonomist to protect worker health and safety by considering the entire system, not just isolated components. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the immediate physical task, without considering the broader context, fails to adhere to the systemic nature of ergonomic interventions. This could lead to a solution that is ineffective or even detrimental, potentially shifting the risk to another part of the body or work process. Ethically, this represents a failure to conduct a thorough risk assessment as mandated by ergonomic best practices and regulatory expectations for industrial settings. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or worker preference without objective data collection and analysis is also professionally unacceptable. While worker input is valuable, ergonomic solutions must be evidence-based. Relying on subjective opinions without scientific validation can lead to suboptimal or even harmful interventions, violating the principle of evidence-based practice central to the CIE certification. This approach also risks failing to identify underlying systemic issues that contribute to the problem. A third incorrect approach that implements a solution without a post-implementation evaluation fails to close the loop in the ergonomic process. The CIE framework emphasizes continuous improvement and the need to verify the effectiveness of interventions. Without evaluation, there is no assurance that the problem has been resolved or that new issues have not arisen, representing a significant lapse in professional due diligence and a failure to meet the standards of a certified professional. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured, iterative approach. 1. Define the problem clearly, gathering initial information. 2. Conduct a thorough risk assessment considering all aspects of the work system, human, task, environment. 3. Develop potential solutions based on ergonomic principles and evidence. 4. Evaluate the feasibility and potential impact of proposed solutions. 5. Implement the chosen solution. 6. Evaluate the effectiveness of the implemented solution and make adjustments as necessary. This systematic process ensures that interventions are well-founded, effective, and contribute to a safer and more productive work environment. Question 10. Process analysis reveals a pattern of reported discomfort and fatigue among assembly line workers performing repetitive tasks. While initial observations suggest potential ergonomic stressors, the precise nature and contributing factors of these issues are not fully understood. The organization is seeking a comprehensive understanding to implement effective interventions. Which of the following approaches would best address this situation, considering the need for actionable insights and adherence to best practices in industrial ergonomics? Option A. Implement a broad survey distributed to all employees, asking them to rate their general job satisfaction and perceived physical demands on a Likert scale, without specific task-level analysis. Option B. Conduct a series of detailed time-motion studies to meticulously document every movement and posture during the assembly tasks, focusing solely on objective biomechanical measurements. Option C. Employ a combination of validated quantitative risk assessment tools to measure exposure levels and conduct structured interviews with a representative sample of workers to gather their perspectives on task demands, perceived exertion, and environmental factors. Option D. Rely exclusively on anecdotal evidence and worker complaints, using these as the sole basis for identifying and prioritizing ergonomic interventions. Correct answer is C. Employ a combination of validated quantitative risk assessment tools to measure exposure levels and conduct structured interviews with a representative sample of workers to gather their perspectives on task demands, perceived exertion, and environmental factors. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in industrial ergonomics, selecting the most appropriate assessment method to address identified risks. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for comprehensive data with practical constraints such as time, resources, and the specific nature of the ergonomic risk. Careful judgment is required to ensure the chosen method provides actionable insights that align with regulatory expectations and ethical responsibilities to worker well-being. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it acknowledges the limitations of purely quantitative methods when dealing with complex, multifactorial ergonomic issues. While quantitative data is valuable for establishing baseline measurements and tracking changes, it may not fully capture the nuances of worker experience, task variability, or the psychosocial aspects that contribute to musculoskeletal disorders. A mixed methods approach, incorporating qualitative data, allows for a more holistic understanding of the risk, leading to more targeted and effective interventions. This aligns with the ethical imperative to protect worker health and safety, and implicitly with regulatory frameworks that require employers to identify and control hazards, which necessitates a thorough understanding of those hazards. An approach relying solely on quantitative methods is professionally unacceptable because it risks overlooking critical contextual factors. For instance, a high score on a quantitative risk assessment tool might not reveal the underlying reasons for that score, such as poor work organization, lack of autonomy, or inadequate training, which are best understood through qualitative inquiry. This failure to gather a complete picture of the risk could lead to ineffective or misdirected interventions, potentially violating the employer's duty of care and regulatory requirements to implement appropriate controls. An approach relying solely on qualitative methods is also professionally unacceptable. While qualitative data can provide rich insights into worker perceptions and experiences, it may lack the objective, measurable data needed to prioritize interventions, demonstrate the effectiveness of changes, or meet specific regulatory reporting requirements that often demand quantifiable metrics. Without quantitative data, it can be difficult to establish the severity of a risk or to justify the resources needed for corrective actions, potentially leaving workers exposed to ongoing hazards. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the ergonomic risks identified. This includes considering the nature of the tasks, the potential for musculoskeletal disorders, the available resources, and the specific objectives of the assessment. A tiered approach, starting with a broad overview and then drilling down with more specific methods as needed, is often effective. Professionals should always consider how the chosen method will generate data that is both meaningful for intervention design and defensible from a regulatory and ethical standpoint, ensuring that worker well-being remains the primary focus. Question 11. Investigation of the principles of workspace design in a manufacturing setting. A certified industrial ergonomist is tasked with evaluating an existing assembly line station. The station has been in use for several years and has been identified as a potential contributor to worker discomfort and fatigue. The ergonomist must recommend improvements that align with established ergonomic principles and relevant regulatory frameworks. Which of the following approaches best reflects a comprehensive and compliant strategy for evaluating and improving this workspace? Option A. Conduct a thorough ergonomic assessment of the workstation, including measurements of reach envelopes, posture analysis, and force exertion, and compare findings against relevant national occupational safety and health standards and guidelines to identify specific risk factors and propose evidence-based design modification. Option B. Focus on aesthetic improvements to the workstation, such as better lighting and color schemes, believing that a more visually appealing environment will positively impact worker morale and reduce stress, without directly addressing physical task demands. Option C. Prioritize modifications that are known to increase production speed, assuming that a more efficient workflow will inherently reduce worker strain, and implement changes based on common industry practices without detailed analysis. Option D. Rely primarily on worker feedback regarding perceived discomfort, implementing changes based on individual suggestions without objective ergonomic evaluation or consideration of broader regulatory requirements. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough ergonomic assessment of the workstation, including measurements of reach envelopes, posture analysis, and force exertion, and compare findings against relevant national occupational safety and health standards and guidelines to identify specific risk factors and propose evidence-based design modifications. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in industrial ergonomics, balancing the immediate needs of production with the long-term health and safety of workers, all within the constraints of existing regulatory frameworks. The professional challenge lies in interpreting and applying the principles of workspace design to a specific, potentially suboptimal, existing setup, rather than designing from scratch. This requires a nuanced understanding of how various design elements interact and impact human performance and well-being, and the ability to justify proposed changes based on established ergonomic principles and relevant regulations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, evidence-based evaluation of the workspace against established ergonomic principles and relevant regulatory requirements. This involves a comprehensive assessment of physical factors, task demands, and worker feedback to identify specific risks and opportunities for improvement. Adherence to regulations, such as those pertaining to workplace safety and health, is paramount. By focusing on objective measurements, task analysis, and worker input, this approach ensures that proposed modifications are not only theoretically sound, but also practically effective and legally compliant, promoting a safer and more productive work environment. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on increasing production output, without considering the ergonomic implications, fails to uphold the ethical and regulatory duty to protect worker health. This approach risks exacerbating or creating musculoskeletal disorders, leading to increased absenteeism, workers' compensation claims, and potential legal penalties for non-compliance with safety regulations. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or worker preferences without objective ergonomic assessment may lead to superficial changes that do not address the root causes of ergonomic issues, potentially wasting resources and failing to achieve desired improvements in safety or efficiency. Furthermore, implementing changes without considering the broader regulatory landscape can result in non-compliance and associated liabilities. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Define the problem. Clearly identify the ergonomic concerns and their potential impact. 2. Gather information. Conduct objective assessments including measurements, task analysis, and worker interviews. 3. Consult relevant standards and regulations. Identify applicable laws, guidelines, and best practices. 4. Develop potential solutions. Brainstorm and evaluate design modifications based on ergonomic principles. 5. Analyze risks and benefits. Assess the potential impact of each solution on worker health, safety, productivity, and cost. 6. Select and implement the best solution. Choose the option that offers the most effective and compliant outcome. 7. Evaluate and refine. Monitor the effectiveness of implemented changes and make adjustments as needed. Question 12. What factors determine the most appropriate workplace observation technique for a certified industrial ergonomist to employ when assessing the ergonomic risks of a manual assembly line operation in a U.S.-based manufacturing facility? Option A. The availability of advanced technological equipment, even if simpler methods would yield equivalent or superior data for the specific task. Option B. The perceived speed at which the observation can be completed to maximize the number of tasks assessed in a single visit. Option C. The personal preference of the observer for a particular data collection method, regardless of its suitability for the task. Option D. The need to capture detailed postural information and task variability without significantly disrupting the production flow. The correct answer is D. the need to capture detailed postural information and task variability without significantly disrupting the production flow. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for certified industrial ergonomists, CIE, in the United States, selecting the most appropriate workplace observation technique to gather accurate and actionable data for an ergonomic assessment. The challenge lies in balancing the need for comprehensive data with the practical constraints of the workplace, such as minimizing disruption to operations and ensuring the validity of the observations. A CIE must possess a deep understanding of various observational methods and their suitability for different tasks, environments, and objectives. The correct approach is to select a technique that allows for detailed observation of work activities, postures, and environmental factors without unduly influencing the worker's natural behavior. This aligns with the ethical and professional standards of the CIE, which emphasize objective data collection and the avoidance of observer bias. By choosing a method that captures the nuances of the work, the CIE can identify specific risk factors and develop targeted interventions that are likely to be effective and sustainable, thereby fulfilling their professional responsibility to improve worker well-being and reduce injury risk. This approach is implicitly supported by general principles of industrial hygiene and safety regulations in the U.S., which mandate thorough hazard identification and risk assessment. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on a quick, superficial observation without systematic recording. This fails to capture critical details of the task, such as subtle postural deviations, repetitive motion, or environmental influences that may only become apparent over time or during specific phases of the work cycle. Such a superficial approach risks missing key ergonomic stressors, leading to an incomplete or inaccurate assessment and potentially ineffective recommendations. This could be considered a failure to meet the standard of care expected of a CIE, potentially violating ethical obligations to conduct a thorough assessment. Another incorrect approach is to use a technique that is overly intrusive or disruptive to the work process. For example, extensively interviewing workers during critical task execution, or requiring them to perform tasks in an unnatural manner for observation purposes can introduce significant observer effects, rendering the collected data unreliable. This not only compromises the integrity of the assessment, but can also negatively impact productivity and worker morale, creating an adversarial relationship rather than a collaborative one. Ethically, a CIE should strive to minimize disruption and respect the worker's normal work routine. Finally, choosing a technique that is not suited to the specific task being observed, such as using a checklist for a highly variable and complex task, would also be an incorrect approach. This would lead to a lack of detailed information about the specific ergonomic risks associated with that task, making it difficult to develop precise and effective recommendations. CIE must demonstrate the professional judgment to match the observational method to the nature of the work being analyzed. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a systematic evaluation of the work task, the environment, the objectives of the assessment, and the potential impact of different observation methods. A CIE should consider the level of detail required, the potential for observer effects, the time and resources available, and the need to minimize disruption. This involves a critical assessment of the strengths and limitations of various observational techniques, such as direct observation with detailed note-taking, video recording for later analysis, or task analysis checklists, and selecting the most appropriate combination to achieve a comprehensive and valid ergonomic assessment. Question 13. When evaluating a manufacturing facility's workflow to identify potential ergonomic risks, which of the following best defines the scope of an industrial ergonomist's responsibility according to the Certified Industrial Ergonomist (CIE) framework? Option A. A comprehensive assessment of the interaction between workers, their tasks, the tools and equipment they use, and the overall work environment, including organizational factors. Optimize human well-being and system performance. Option B. A reactive approach focused exclusively on addressing employee complaints of musculoskeletal discomfort through immediate, low-cost adjustments to workstations. Option C. A cost-benefit analysis to determine the financial feasibility of implementing any ergonomic improvements, prioritizing savings over potential health benefits. Option D. The sole provision of specialized ergonomic equipment, such as adjustable chairs and specialized keyboards, to address reported discomfort among workers. The correct answer is A. A comprehensive assessment of the interaction between workers, their tasks, the tools and equipment they use, and the overall work environment, including organizational factors, to optimize human well-being and system performance. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge for certified industrial ergonomists, CIE, where the scope of their professional responsibility intersects with organizational policies and the practical limitations of implementing ergonomic solutions. The challenge lies in accurately defining and applying the principles of ergonomics within the context of a specific workplace, ensuring that interventions are both effective and compliant with relevant standards. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it adheres to the fundamental definition and scope of ergonomics as established by professional bodies and regulatory guidelines relevant to industrial settings. This involves a systematic process of analyzing work systems, identifying hazards, and recommending solutions that optimize human well-being and overall system performance. By focusing on the interaction between humans, tasks, and the work environment, the ergonomist ensures that interventions are evidence-based and address the root causes of potential issues, aligning with the ethical obligation to protect worker health and safety. An incorrect approach that narrowly defines ergonomics solely as the provision of physical equipment fails to encompass the broader scope of the discipline. This overlooks crucial aspects such as work organization, task design, and human-computer interaction, which are integral to a comprehensive ergonomic assessment. Such a limited view can lead to incomplete solutions that do not effectively mitigate risks or improve performance, potentially violating the professional standard of care expected of a CIE. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings over a thorough ergonomic analysis is ethically problematic. While cost-effectiveness is a consideration, it should not supersede the primary responsibility of ensuring worker safety and health. Ignoring potential ergonomic risks due to budgetary constraints can lead to increased injury rates, reduced productivity, and potential legal liabilities, all of which are contrary to the ethical principles guiding the practice of industrial ergonomics. A third incorrect approach that relies solely on employee complaints without systematic investigation fails to leverage the expertise of a CIE. While employee feedback is valuable, it is often subjective and may not identify all underlying ergonomic stressors. A professional ergonomist must employ systematic methods to objectively assess the work environment and tasks, ensuring that interventions are based on sound ergonomic principles and data, not just anecdotal evidence. This approach risks misdiagnosing problems or implementing ineffective solutions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the definition and scope of industrial ergonomics as per the CIE certification standards and applicable regulations. This involves a systematic process of problem identification, data collection, including observation, measurement, and employee feedback, analysis of the human work interface, development of potential solutions, implementation, and evaluation. The framework should always prioritize worker well-being and safety, supported by evidence-based practices, while also considering organizational constraints and objectives in a balanced manner. Question 14. Governance review demonstrates a need to evaluate the cognitive demands placed upon assembly line workers. Which of the following approaches would best satisfy the requirements for a comprehensive and defensible mental workload assessment within an industrial ergonomics framework? Option A. Implement a new, unvalidated questionnaire developed by the company's HR department to gauge employee perceptions of task difficulty. Option B. Utilize a combination of validated subjective workload assessment tools, objective performance metrics e.g., error rates, task completion times, and a structured task analysis to understand cognitive requirements. Option C. Focus solely on the speed of production and identify workers who are consistently meeting or exceeding targets, assuming high performance indicates manageable mental workload. Option D. Conduct a detailed task analysis to identify all physical movements and time each step, then ask workers if they feel stressed by their tasks. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed task analysis to identify all physical movements and time each step, then ask workers if they feel stressed by their tasks. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because assessing mental workload in an industrial setting requires a nuanced understanding of cognitive demands that are not directly observable. The challenge lies in moving beyond purely physical task analysis to incorporate the cognitive burden on workers, which can significantly impact performance, safety, and well-being. Without a systematic and validated approach, an ergonomist risks underestimating or misinterpreting the mental demands, leading to ineffective interventions or even exacerbating existing issues. The pressure to demonstrate tangible improvements within a governance review context adds further complexity, requiring robust evidence and justification for proposed actions. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves utilizing a validated, multi-method assessment strategy that combines subjective reports, objective performance measures, and physiological indicators where appropriate. This aligns with best professional practice for industrial ergonomics, which emphasizes a holistic understanding of the work system. Specifically, referencing established ergonomic assessment tools and frameworks, such as those outlined by the International Ergonomics Association or relevant national bodies if specified by the exam jurisdiction, provides a structured and defensible methodology. This approach ensures that the assessment is comprehensive, considers multiple facets of mental workload, and is grounded in scientific evidence, thereby meeting ethical obligations to protect worker health and safety, and fulfilling the requirements of a governance review by providing reliable data. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to rely solely on direct observation of physical tasks and worker interviews without employing specific mental workload assessment tools. This fails to capture the cognitive strain, such as decision-making complexity, attention demands, and memory load, which are crucial components of mental workload. Ethically, this is a failure to conduct a thorough risk assessment, potentially leaving workers exposed to cognitive overload and its associated risks, e.g., errors, stress, burnout. Regulatory failure would occur if the jurisdiction mandates specific standards for assessing cognitive hazards. Another incorrect approach would be to implement interventions based on anecdotal evidence or assumptions about mental workload without a systematic assessment. This is professionally unsound as it lacks empirical support and may lead to ineffective or even detrimental changes. It represents an ethical failure to base interventions on evidence-based practices and a regulatory failure if it bypasses established assessment protocols required by governing bodies. A third incorrect approach would be to focus exclusively on subjective self-reports of stress without correlating them with objective measures of mental workload or task demands. While subjective reports are valuable, they can be influenced by factors other than cognitive load. Relying solely on this can lead to misdiagnosis of the root cause of perceived stress, failing to address the actual cognitive demands of the task. This is an ethical lapse in providing a comprehensive assessment and a potential regulatory failure if the jurisdiction requires objective validation of ergonomic risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, evidence-based approach to mental workload assessment. This involves 1. Defining the scope and objectives of the assessment, aligning with the governance review's goals. 2. Selecting appropriate assessment methods, e.g., task analysis, subjective questionnaires like NASA TLX, objective measures like reaction time or error rates, physiological measures if applicable and ethical. 3. Conducting the assessment rigorously, ensuring data validity and reliability. 4. Analyzing the collected data to identify specific cognitive demands and potential overload. 5. Developing evidence-based recommendations for intervention, prioritizing those that directly address identified cognitive risks. 6. Communicating findings clearly and defensibly to stakeholders, supporting the governance review with robust ergonomic insights. Question 15. Compliance review shows a worker reporting persistent wrist pain during repetitive assembly tasks. The ergonomist observes the worker's posture and movement patterns. Which of the following approaches best reflects a comprehensive evaluation of the worker's human anatomy and physiology in this context? Option A. Recommend immediate rest and ice for the affected wrist, deferring further ergonomic assessment until symptoms subside. Option B. Advise the worker to simply adjust their grip strength, assuming the pain is due to excessive force application. Option C. Conduct a detailed biomechanical analysis of the wrist and forearm muscles, considering nerve pathways and joint mechanics, to identify specific stressors contributing to the pain. Option D. Suggest the worker try a different, unrelated task for a few days to see if the pain disappears, without analyzing the original task's ergonomic factors. The correct answer is A. Recommend immediate rest and ice for the affected wrist, deferring further ergonomic assessment until symptoms subside. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an ergonomist to balance the immediate needs of a worker experiencing discomfort with the long-term implications of potential musculoskeletal disorders, MSD. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the physiological basis of the reported symptoms and determining the most effective, evidence-based intervention within the constraints of available resources and regulatory requirements. Misdiagnosis or inappropriate intervention can lead to prolonged discomfort, reduced productivity, and potential legal ramifications if workplace safety standards are not met. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, systematic evaluation of the worker's reported symptoms, considering both the anatomical and physiological factors involved. This aligns with the ethical obligation of an ergonomist to provide competent and evidence-based services. By focusing on understanding the underlying biomechanical stressors and the body's response, the ergonomist can develop targeted interventions that address the root cause of the discomfort, rather than merely treating the symptom. This approach is consistent with the principles of industrial ergonomics, which aim to prevent MSDs and promote worker well-being through scientific assessment and intervention. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach fails to adequately investigate the physiological mechanisms contributing to the worker's discomfort. This superficial assessment risks misinterpreting symptoms, leading to ineffective interventions that do not address the underlying issue. Ethically, this represents a failure to provide competent service and could violate professional standards by not applying a rigorous, scientific methodology. Another incorrect approach focuses solely on immediate symptom relief without a comprehensive understanding of the biomechanical factors at play. While short-term comfort is important, neglecting the root cause can lead to recurrence of symptoms and the development of chronic MSDs. This approach is professionally deficient as it does not uphold the preventative goals of industrial ergonomics and may not comply with regulations mandating proactive hazard identification and control. A further incorrect approach relies on anecdotal evidence or generalized solutions without specific assessment of the individual's situation. This lacks the scientific rigor expected of an ergonomist and can lead to inappropriate recommendations that may even exacerbate the problem. Professionally, this demonstrates a lack of critical thinking and a failure to adhere to evidence-based practice, potentially leading to non-compliance with workplace safety guidelines that require individualized risk assessments. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with a detailed understanding of the reported symptoms and their potential anatomical and physiological origins. This involves active listening, careful observation, and the application of ergonomic assessment tools and techniques. The next step is to analyze the work environment and tasks for potential risk factors that correlate with the reported symptoms. Based on this comprehensive assessment, the ergonomist should formulate hypotheses about the underlying causes and develop a prioritized intervention plan. This plan should be evidence-based, considering the effectiveness and feasibility of proposed solutions. Finally, the ergonomist must document the assessment, recommendations, and outcomes, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 16. Process analysis reveals that a manufacturing client wishes to update their workstation designs based on ergonomic principles that were considered state-of-the-art 20 years ago, citing cost-effectiveness and familiarity with the older data. As a certified industrial ergonomist, how should you approach this situation, considering the historical evolution of ergonomic knowledge and its implications for current regulatory compliance? Option A. Proceed with the historical ergonomic principles as requested, but include a disclaimer stating that the recommendations are based on outdated information and may not meet current safety standards. Option B. Immediately implement the client's preferred design based on historical data, assuming their directive reflects their risk tolerance and budget constraints. Option C. Explain to the client how ergonomic science and regulatory expectations have evolved, demonstrating the potential risks and liabilities of using outdated principles, and propose a phased approach that integrates current best practices while acknowledging their historical context. Option D. Refuse to work with the client, stating that their request is incompatible with modern ergonomic standards and regulatory requirements. The correct answer is C. Explain to the client how ergonomic science and regulatory expectations have evolved, demonstrating the potential risks and liabilities of using outdated principles, and propose a phased approach that integrates current best practices while acknowledging their historical context. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an ergonomist to balance the immediate financial pressures of a client with the long-term ethical and regulatory obligations to worker safety and health. The client's desire to expedite a process based on historical, potentially outdated, ergonomic principles, rather than current best practices and regulatory expectations, creates a conflict. The ergonomist must navigate this by demonstrating the value of evolving ergonomic knowledge and its legal implications without alienating the client. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to current regulatory frameworks and ethical guidelines for industrial ergonomics. By advocating for the integration of contemporary ergonomic principles, informed by the historical evolution of the field, and its impact on worker well-being and legal compliance, the ergonomist upholds their professional responsibility. This approach acknowledges the client's request, but frames it within the context of evolving standards, which are often implicitly or explicitly mandated by regulatory bodies to ensure a safe and healthy work environment. This aligns with the core tenets of professional ergonomics, which aim to prevent injury and illness through scientifically sound and legally compliant practices. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves readily agreeing to the client's request to solely rely on historical ergonomic data without critical evaluation. This fails to acknowledge the evolution of ergonomic science and its direct impact on regulatory compliance. Regulatory bodies, such as those governing occupational safety and health, expect practitioners to apply the most current and effective knowledge to mitigate risks. Relying on outdated information could lead to inadequate hazard identification and control, potentially violating general duty clauses or specific standards related to workplace safety, thereby exposing both the client and the ergonomist to legal and ethical repercussions. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's historical data entirely without attempting to integrate it or explain its limitations. While historical data can be valuable for understanding trends, a complete disregard for it, without a reasoned explanation rooted in current best practices and regulatory expectations, can be perceived as unprofessional and uncollaborative. This could lead to a breakdown in client trust and a failure to achieve the desired outcome of improving workplace ergonomics in a manner that is acceptable to the client. Ethically, ergonomists are expected to communicate effectively and provide evidence-based recommendations, which includes explaining why older methods may no longer be sufficient or compliant. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the project using only historical data, assuming that the client's directive supersedes the need for current best practices and regulatory awareness. This is a significant ethical and professional failure. The ergonomist has a duty to inform the client of potential risks and liabilities associated with noncompliance with current standards. Ignoring the evolution of ergonomic knowledge and its regulatory implications is a dereliction of professional duty and could lead to significant harm to workers and legal consequences for all parties involved. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the client's request and the underlying context. This should be followed by an assessment of current regulatory requirements and best practices in industrial ergonomics. The next step involves critically evaluating the client's proposed approach against these standards, identifying any discrepancies or potential risks. Communication is paramount. Professionals must clearly articulate their findings, explain the rationale behind their recommendations, and educate the client on the implications of different approaches, particularly concerning safety, health, and legal compliance. This process ensures that decisions are evidence-based, ethically sound, and aligned with professional obligations. Question 17. Compliance review shows that a manufacturing facility is experiencing a slowdown in its assembly line operations, leading to increased overtime and reported discomfort among workers. The operations manager is pushing for immediate changes to improve throughput. Which approach to designing ergonomic workspaces for process optimization is most aligned with professional best practices and regulatory expectations for a certified industrial ergonomist? Option A. Conduct a thorough ergonomic assessment of the current workstations, involving direct worker observation, task analysis, and measurement of physical demands. Based on this data, develop and pilot proposed workstation modifications that address identified ergonomic risks and inefficiencies, followed by a comprehensive evaluation of their impact on both worker well-being and productivity before full implementation. Option B. Focus solely on increasing the speed of the assembly line machinery and providing workers with basic personal protective equipment, PPE, to mitigate any reported discomfort, assuming that the core workstation design is fundamentally sound and the issue is primarily one of pace. Option C. Implement rapid workstation adjustments based on the operations manager's suggestions and anecdotal feedback from a few vocal employees, prioritizing changes that appear to offer the quickest visual improvement in workflow without extensive data collection or formal risk assessment. Option D. Introduce a completely new, unproven workstation design that promises significant efficiency gains based on a competitor's marketing materials, without conducting any pilot testing or ergonomic risk assessment specific to the facility's tasks and workforce. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough ergonomic assessment of the current workstations, involving direct worker observation, task analysis, and measurement of physical demands. Based on this data, develop and pilot proposed workstation modifications that address identified ergonomic risks and inefficiencies, followed by a comprehensive evaluation of their impact on both worker well-being and productivity before full implementation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for process optimization with the long-term implications of ergonomic design on worker well-being, productivity, and regulatory compliance. The certified industrial ergonomist, CIE, must navigate potential resistance to change, budget constraints, and the diverse needs of the workforce. Careful judgment is required to ensure that proposed changes are not only efficient, but also sustainable and legally sound. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, data-driven, and user-centered methodology. This aligns with the core principles of industrial ergonomics, which advocate for designing work systems that fit the worker, rather than forcing the worker to fit the system. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and intent of regulations that mandate safe and healthy working conditions by proactively identifying and mitigating ergonomic risks. This approach fosters a culture of safety, reduces the likelihood of musculoskeletal disorders, MSD, and can lead to increased productivity and reduced errors, all of which are implicitly or explicitly supported by regulatory frameworks aimed at worker protection. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed of implementation without adequate worker input or risk assessment fails to meet the ethical obligation to protect worker health and safety. Such an approach could lead to the introduction of new ergonomic hazards, increasing the risk of MSDs and potential noncompliance with occupational safety and health regulations. Ethically, it prioritizes expediency over the well-being of individuals. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or superficial observations, rather than objective data and established ergonomic principles, is professionally unsound. This can result in ineffective solutions that do not address the root causes of ergonomic issues, potentially leading to continued risk and dissatisfaction. It also risks misinterpreting or overlooking subtle but significant ergonomic stressors, which could have long-term health consequences for employees and expose the organization to liability. A third incorrect approach that disregards established ergonomic standards and guidelines in favor of a novel but unproven method is also professionally unacceptable. While innovation is valuable, it must be grounded in scientific evidence and validated through rigorous testing. Implementing unproven methods without proper due diligence can introduce unforeseen risks and may not achieve the desired process optimization or ergonomic improvements, potentially violating the duty of care owed to employees. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Define the problem and objectives clearly. 2. Gather comprehensive data through observation, interviews, and objective measurements. 3. Analyze the data using established ergonomic principles and relevant regulatory requirements. 4. Develop and evaluate potential solutions, considering feasibility, cost, and impact on workers. 5. Implement the chosen solution with appropriate training and monitoring. 6. Evaluate the effectiveness of the implemented solution and make adjustments as needed. This iterative process ensures that decisions are informed, evidence-based, and aligned with professional responsibilities. Question 18. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a significant number of experienced production line workers are reporting increased fatigue, a rise in minor errors, and a general sense of being overwhelmed, despite no recent changes to the physical layout or equipment of their workstations. The ergonomic team has observed that the introduction of a new, more complex quality control checklist that requires real-time data entry and cross-referencing with previous production logs has coincided with these reports. The Certified Industrial Ergonomist, CIE, is tasked with recommending interventions. Which of the following approaches best addresses the reported issues based on cognitive load theory and its application in industrial ergonomics? Option A suggests that the workers are experiencing a normal adjustment period to new technology and that their performance will improve with time and practice. Option B propose a comprehensive redesign of the physical workstations to incorporate more advanced ergonomic seating and adjustable monitor arms, assuming the physical environment is the primary contributor to fatigue. Option C recommends streamlining the quality control checklist by reducing the number of data points required and providing pre-populated fields where possible, alongside implementing a simplified visual interface for data entry that prioritizes essential information. Option D. Advise management that the workers may need additional training on the new quality control system to improve their efficiency and reduce errors. The correct answer is C. Recommend streamlining the quality control checklist by reducing the number of data points required and providing pre-populated fields where possible, alongside implementing a simplified visual interface for data entry that prioritizes essential information. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the Certified Industrial Ergonomist, CIE, to balance the immediate, observable physical complaints of workers with the less tangible, yet equally impactful cognitive demands of their tasks. The CIE must move beyond a purely biomechanical assessment to understand how information processing, decision-making, and mental workload contribute to fatigue, errors, and dissatisfaction. The regulatory framework for industrial ergonomics, as governed by relevant U.S. occupational safety and health standards, e.g., OSHA General Duty Clause, which mandates a workplace free from recognized hazards, implicitly includes cognitive hazards when they lead to foreseeable harm. Ethical practice for a CIE also demands a holistic approach that considers all factors affecting worker well-being and performance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the underlying cognitive load contributing to the reported issues. By applying cognitive load theory, the CIE can systematically identify specific task elements that overload working memory, increase decision complexity, or require excessive attention. This allows for targeted interventions that reduce mental strain, such as simplifying procedures, improving information display, providing decision support tools, or optimizing task sequencing. This aligns with the CIE's responsibility to prevent injuries and illnesses, which can stem from both physical and cognitive stressors, and upholds the ethical obligation to protect worker health and safety comprehensively. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on physical ergonomics, such as recommending new chairs or adjusting workstation heights without investigating the cognitive aspects, fails to address the root cause of the reported problems. This is a regulatory failure because it neglects a recognized hazard, cognitive overload leading to errors and fatigue, that can contribute to accidents or musculoskeletal disorders. Ethically, it is a failure to provide a complete and effective ergonomic solution, potentially leading to continued worker distress and reduced productivity. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the feedback as mere complaining or lack of training is a significant ethical and professional failure. It demonstrates a lack of empathy and a disregard for worker input, which is a critical source of information for ergonomic assessment. This approach also ignores the potential for cognitive overload to manifest as perceived difficulty or frustration, which is a valid indicator of a problem. Regulatory-wise, it risks overlooking hazards that could lead to compliance issues if not addressed. A third incorrect approach that suggests implementing a complex new software system without a thorough cognitive task analysis is also problematic. While technology can be a solution, introducing it without understanding its cognitive demands can exacerbate the problem. This is a failure to apply sound ergonomic principles, potentially creating new cognitive hazards and increasing the risk of errors and user resistance. It is a regulatory risk as it may not effectively mitigate existing hazards and could introduce new ones. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted approach. First, actively listen to and validate stakeholder feedback, recognizing it as a crucial data point. Second, conduct a comprehensive ergonomic assessment that explicitly includes cognitive factors, utilizing tools and methodologies from cognitive load theory. Third, analyze the interplay between physical and cognitive demands. Fourth, develop and implement interventions that address both physical and cognitive stressors, prioritizing those with the greatest potential to reduce risk and improve well-being. Finally, evaluate the effectiveness of interventions through ongoing monitoring and feedback. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates a desire for rapid identification and resolution of ergonomic issues in the manufacturing plant. As a certified industrial ergonomist, which approach best balances the need for timely feedback with the requirement for a robust, evidence-based ergonomic assessment to ensure compliance with occupational safety and health principles. Option A. Focus solely on readily observable physical symptoms reported by workers, without investigating the underlying work system factors or conducting objective measurements of task demands. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive ergonomic assessment that includes direct observation of tasks, analysis of work methods, measurement of physical demands, e.g., posture, force, repetition, environmental condition evaluation, and structured interviews with affected workers and supervisors, utilizing established ergonomic assessment tools and methodologies. Option C. Primarily rely on worker suggestions and immediate symptom reporting to identify and implement quick fixes, assuming that addressing reported discomfort will resolve underlying ergonomic risks. Option D. Utilize generic ergonomic checklists without tailoring them to the specific tasks, equipment, and work environment of the manufacturing plant. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive ergonomic assessment that includes direct observation of tasks, analysis of work methods, measurement of physical demands, e.g., posture, force, repetition, environmental condition evaluation, and structured interviews with affected workers and supervisors, utilizing established ergonomic assessment tools and methodologies. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs and perceptions of frontline workers with the systematic, evidence-based approach mandated by ergonomic assessment principles. The pressure to provide quick solutions can sometimes lead to superficial interventions that do not address the root causes of ergonomic risk. Careful judgment is required to ensure that assessments are thorough, scientifically sound, and lead to sustainable improvements, rather than just addressing immediate complaints. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, multifaceted methodology that aligns with the principles of industrial ergonomics and the ethical obligations of a certified industrial ergonomist. This approach involves a combination of direct observation, data collection, and worker engagement, which are foundational to identifying and mitigating ergonomic hazards. Specifically, it emphasizes the use of established ergonomic assessment tools and techniques, such as task analysis, biomechanical modeling, where appropriate and without requiring calculation, and the collection of subjective feedback, all within the framework of relevant occupational safety and health regulations. This comprehensive method ensures that interventions are based on objective data and a deep understanding of the work system, leading to effective and lasting risk reduction. An incorrect approach that relies solely on worker suggestions without objective validation fails to meet the professional standard of an ergonomist. While worker input is crucial, it is not a substitute for a systematic assessment. This approach risks implementing solutions that are ineffective, misdirected, or even introduce new hazards, potentially violating the employer's duty of care under occupational health and safety legislation to provide a safe working environment. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on readily observable physical symptoms without investigating the underlying work system factors, e.g., posture, force, repetition, duration, environmental conditions, is also professionally unacceptable. Superficial analysis neglects the systemic nature of ergonomic risk and may lead to interventions that only temporarily alleviate symptoms rather than addressing the root causes. This can be seen as a failure to conduct a thorough risk assessment as required by regulatory frameworks, potentially exposing workers to continued or unmitigated hazards. Finally, an approach that solely utilizes generic checklists without considering the specific context of the tasks and work environment is inadequate. While checklists can be a useful starting point, they often lack the specificity required for complex industrial settings. A professional ergonomist must adapt and supplement such tools with context-specific analysis to ensure all relevant ergonomic stressors are identified and addressed. Adhering to the principle of due diligence in risk management, the professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the scope of the request and the available resources. 2. Prioritizing a systematic, evidence-based approach that integrates worker input with objective data collection. 3. Selecting appropriate ergonomic assessment methods based on the nature of the work and potential hazards. 4. Documenting the assessment process and findings thoroughly. 5. Communicating recommendations clearly and justifying them based on ergonomic principles and regulatory requirements. 6. Following up to evaluate the effectiveness of implemented interventions. Question 20. The assessment process reveals that employees in a manufacturing facility are reporting high levels of stress, low job satisfaction, and significant concerns regarding the pace of work, lack of autonomy, and unclear performance expectations. As a certified industrial ergonomist, which of the following actions would be the most appropriate and effective response to address these psychosocial risk factors? Option A. Propose the implementation of mandatory mindfulness and meditation sessions during work hours to help employees cope with the perceived stress. Option B. Advise employees to attend external stress management workshops and encourage them to develop personal coping strategies to better manage their workload. Option C. Suggest that the reported psychosocial issues are subjective and not directly within the purview of industrial ergonomics, recommending that HR address these concerns separately. Option D. Recommend a comprehensive review of work organization, job design, and performance management systems, involving employee participation in developing solutions to enhance autonomy, clarify expectations, and optimize workflow. The correct answer is D. Recommend a comprehensive review of work organization, job design, and performance management systems, involving employee participation in developing solutions to enhance autonomy, clarify expectations, and optimize workflow. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a complex interplay of psychosocial risk factors, including high levels of reported stress, low job satisfaction, and concerns about work organization. This scenario is professionally challenging because psychosocial risks are often less tangible and harder to quantify than physical risks, yet they have significant implications for worker well-being, productivity, and organizational health. The certified industrial ergonomist, CIE, must navigate these subjective experiences and translate them into actionable ergonomic interventions within the specific regulatory framework governing their practice. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified psychosocial risk factors through a multifaceted strategy that aligns with the principles of industrial ergonomics and relevant occupational health and safety regulations. This approach prioritizes worker involvement, data-driven decision-making, and the implementation of controls that target the root causes of stress and dissatisfaction, such as improving work organization and job design. It acknowledges that effective psychosocial risk management requires a systemic perspective, integrating individual well-being with organizational effectiveness. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on individual coping mechanisms fails to address the organizational and work design factors contributing to stress and low job satisfaction. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it shifts the burden of managing risks from the employer to the employee, neglecting the employer's duty of care under occupational health and safety legislation to provide a safe and healthy working environment. It also fails to meet the professional standards of an ergonomist, who is trained to identify and mitigate hazards at the source. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the reported psychosocial factors as subjective and outside the scope of ergonomic intervention is a significant professional and regulatory failure. This ignores the established link between psychosocial factors and physical health outcomes, as well as the legal and ethical obligations to address all recognized hazards in the workplace. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of modern ergonomic principles, which increasingly recognize the interconnectedness of physical and psychosocial well-being. A further incorrect approach that proposes generic stress management workshops without investigating the underlying causes of stress and dissatisfaction is also professionally unacceptable. While stress management can be a component of a broader strategy, it is insufficient as a standalone solution when work organization and job design are identified as primary contributors. This approach fails to meet the professional responsibility to conduct a thorough risk assessment and implement targeted, effective controls, potentially leading to continued exposure to hazards and a failure to comply with regulatory requirements for hazard control. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, thoroughly understanding and validating the reported psychosocial risks through appropriate assessment tools and worker consultation. Second, analyzing the underlying causes within the work organization, job design, and management practices. Third, developing a comprehensive intervention plan that addresses these root causes, prioritizing organizational and job redesign over individual coping strategies. Fourth, implementing and evaluating the effectiveness of these interventions, ensuring ongoing monitoring and adjustment. And finally, documenting all findings, recommendations, and actions taken in accordance with professional standards and regulatory requirements.